You ready for school? You got your science project?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
My science project?
Okay, let's see how this is gonna turn out. Okay, class, you can turn in your science projects now.
Good morning, Mrs. Glober.
Good morning. You can have your seat now. Okay, class, so some of you made really great grades today on your projects, and some of you didn't. And we need to really dig into science a little bit. I think some of y'all are confused.
Mama, I got an F on my science project!
Wait a minute.
Hello.
Hello? I have so many questions.
Sounds like we need to bring in the big guns. I know just who to call.
Or before, and none of the stars have ever changed position due to parallax. Have you lost your ability to think? Hold on a second. Hello?
What's your favorite conspiracy theory?
You remember that Chinese spy balloon? You know, this one? Yeah, it wasn't a spy balloon. It was actually one of our own satellites. At least that is the conspiracy theory behind it. Now, I would never believe this conspiracy theory because that would be misinformation, okay? And that is not acceptable on this app. I'm just here to tell you a conspiracy theory that some people believe. But some believe that our satellites are held up by helium balloons. They do not float in space like this. They are held by a balloon filled with helium. And people who believe in this theory point to the fact how NASA is the #1 consumer and purchaser of helium. And the conspiracy theory is that this is our own satellite held by a helium balloon that was starting to leak and descend back to the planet. But instead of the government telling us that, oh, this is our own satellite, that satellites are not up there free, hanging up in space, but they are actually held by helium, they decided to push a narrative that, oh, this was a Chinese satellite. But the reason why they waited to take it down over the ocean was to then not have other individuals find out what this was.
Hey, do you all know how many flat sides of a ball there are? I'm just wondering, how many horizons make up a ball? Like flat horizons make up a ball. How many? How many? How many?
In January of 1986, I remember distinctly watching the Space Shuttle Challenger take off and explode into a million pieces. I saw it with my own eyes on TV. However, years later, I learned that they're still alive. How does that work? What kind of sorcery is that? Have a look. That they're still alive.
I also watched that. The whole school stopped for that day to watch a teacher go into space for the first time. Only to watch it explode on TV with my own eyes, just like my brother just said there. Like that, it didn't impact me, but it did impact me. That is such a core memory of mine. Not because of what I seen or anything like that, because of the reaction. The reaction of my fellow students. Crying, freaking out, panic. It's a core memory because of that. Teachers breaking down, freaking out, not knowing how to address the kids because we just traumatized the entire public education that was watching this, right? Like, kids were messed up, okay? Like, I think we ended the day early that day, if I'm not mistaken. Like, that's a core memory, man. Only to find out, yeah, which really angers me, you know, because I don't think there's any denying it when you look into it. I don't think there's any doubt that they're still alive. So what? I will never forget that day. Never. Ever.
Okay, so right now we are going to go over geysers, these things, and what they really are. Here's another one, just to give you a reference. They are all over the earth and more. And here's a bunch. And here's a map showing you. There are lots still active today. And these are what the dried up ones look like. And they will tell you that these are from meteor impacts or an asteroid. Where's the skid mark? The Earth is spinning and elliptical orbiting. Where's the skid mark? It's just like a... And where's the asteroid at that did all of this damage? Where is it? Just nothing? You have to be asleep to believe that garbage. But I will tell you what they really are. Here's another one. Are you ready for what they really are? When God flooded the earth the first time, he opened the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven. So he opened the firmament from the top and the fountains of the deep from the bottom to flood the earth. Those are called geysers. So, there you go. They're not from meteor impacts. No, they're not. It's from God. Because you live in a firmament. A dome. If you don't believe in God, you better start believing in him now. Because he's real. And he made you. Life proves a divine creator. Everything has reason and everything has purpose. Everything is intelligently designed. Okay?
What is beyond the ice wall of Antarctica? Before ever even considering a theory, you always need to look for some sort of tangible proof. And these mysterious blue shards reported in a leak from Antarctic research labs are a little more revealing. They were leaked by this helicopter engineer who was contracted to work at McMurdo Station in Antarctica from 1997 to the year 2000. And if you don't know, McMurdo Station is usually where shit goes down. So this engineer, let's call him Jimmy Boy, claimed that he befriended a few of the scientists doing research there in 1998. The scientists told him that they had two types of ice they worked with down there. There was this ice that they drilled cores out of boreholes in the ground that was cold to the touch, usually clear or some shade of white, and melted into water. Almost all of Antarctica is covered with this type of ice, which is just normal ice. Clearly this wasn't their main focus of research. The only times they ever actively study this ice is when film crews from like National Geographic came down to film a documentary. The other 95% of the time, they studied the forbidden sky ice, totally different than the ice that we're used to. Jimmy wasn't allowed in the labs where they studied sky ice because it was, you know, super duper top secret. But one time, one of the scientists he got close with showed him a piece of the ice and it was unlike any other matter he's ever seen on Earth. First of all, you couldn't touch it with your bare hands and had to wear your heavy duty South Pole exploration gloves when holding it because of how cold it was. Secondly, as you can tell, it was this solid deep blue color, allegedly composed mainly of oxygen, and is why they called it sky ice. And oh man, I haven't even scratched the surface of how deep this goes. Oxygen has a freezing point of about negative 218 degrees Celsius, which is when it turns into a solid, so you'd practically get frostbite just by looking at it. Jimmy held it for a bit with his gloves, of course, noting that it was lighter than regular ice, almost like he could have thrown it up in the air and it would have floated back down. It was also slightly flexible and completely opaque, so you couldn't see through it at all. And it didn't even melt into water when it got warm, but just continually shrank until it ceased to exist, likely turning directly into oxygen gas, which is why they had to study it in Antarctica. They couldn't even transport it to anywhere in the world before it disappeared. disappeared. The Russians knew about this too, and it's part of the reason they all have research stations down there. After 15 minutes or so, the sky ice was almost completely gone, and Jimmy asks his research friend where they even get this ice from. And this is where it gets interesting. Because to that, the scientist replied, they get it from the wall. According to him, if you go deep enough, hundreds of kilometers inland from the coast, you'll run into a huge wall in Antarctica that contains this sky ice, the biggest natural structure in the world. But interesting to see the ice wall mentioned in a scientific setting here. Now, buckle in, cause this is where it actually gets insane, in case you felt like it wasn't already. The US has known about this sky ice for decades, and back in the 60s, they actually tried boring a tunnel through the ice wall. They built a special boring machine made for the super cold temperatures of the sky ice wall and started digging. For the first 2 miles or so, the floor was solid rock, but after that, even the ground under them became the bright blue sky ice, until they got about 5 to 10 miles deep after an entire year of boring, which is pretty damn far and still no sight of the other side. When they realized the tunnel was shrinking and eventually got so small that they could barely even move their machine anymore. Turns out sky ice, when exposed to warmer temperatures, just dissipates into thin air, but in colder temperatures, like inside the tunnel, it regenerates itself. Eventually, the tunnel got so tight it became too difficult to continue boring, so they scrapped the project, ditched the machine, and after many decades, the hole they dug into the wall has now been completely sealed. Now, some people say this sky ice wall sounds almost exactly like what would be called the dome or the firmament in the horizontal earth, or at least fragments of it, and even the most popular book in the world had something to say about it. Ezekiel 1:26 reads, "And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone." Now, whether you believe in the Bible or not, we can all agree it is by definition a historic text. Text that was written sometime in history. Firmament over their heads, appearance of a sapphire stone. I mean, I really don't want to believe this is true, and who knows, maybe this entire sky ice Antarctica story is just completely made up, but as always, what if?
I've never really believed in Jesus or done the whole church thing, but I think I've seen the stuff you guys are talking about here. I just didn't know what it was at the time. I was in the Army from 1997 to 2000, and I was sent to McMurdo Station in Antarctica. I was a helicopter mechanic and crew chief, and they had volunteer tours open for guys to go there and work on the helicopters there. When they asked for volunteers, a bunch of us applied, but only me and one other guy got accepted. The application process had a bunch of questionnaires that we had to fill out, and we had to sit for a bunch of one-on-one interviews. It was mostly just a bunch of questions about what our interests and beliefs were. I was sent to McMurdo Research Station in August of 1998. When we weren't busy de-icing the aircraft and working on them, we had time to hang out with the scientists at the research station. The military unit attached to McMurdo was small, and we didn't have our own separate facilities. We didn't have a PX or a media center. There was no chapel or chaplain, and we didn't have our own separate mail room. We just had to share the same facilities with the scientists and researchers. So over time, I got to be friends with a few of them. They had two different kinds of ice that they worked on and studied. One kind of ice was the normal kind that we've all seen. They took cores of it out of boreholes in the ground. Just like normal ice, it was mostly clear or sometimes white, and it would melt into liquid water if it got warm. The whole area of Antarctica is covered in this kind of ice. But that wasn't their main kind of ice. The only time I ever saw them actually studying normal ice was when a film crew from National Geographic came by. The rest of the time, which was most of the time, the scientists were studying something they called sky ice. This stuff was totally different. We were never allowed to go into the laboratory areas of the station because the labs had to be kept super clean, and they said it would mess up their work if they risked letting too many people in the lab. But one time, one of the researchers that I was friends with showed me a piece of sky ice. You couldn't touch the stuff with your bare hands because it was so cold. And it wasn't clear or white like normal ice. It was solid blue. He said that's why they call it sky ice, because it was the exact same color as the sky. We had to wear thick, heavy, going outside gloves to handle it. The stuff was so cold it would instantly freeze your skin if you touched it. I don't remember what temperature he said it was, but it was something like hundreds of degrees below zero. Way colder than the normal ice that was outside. He had to carry it in a metal bottle that was kind of like a thermos. He let me play with a piece of it for a while. It felt lighter than a piece of normal ice of the same size. Like it wasn't very heavy at all. It almost felt like you could throw it up in the air and it would just float back down. But I didn't try that. And it was also a little flexible when I tried to bend it. It didn't break like normal ice would. And even for a small piece, you couldn't see through it. It was solid blue right from the surface. And here's the really weird part. It didn't melt into water. When it got warm, because we had it inside, it just started to shrink. It got smaller and smaller, but my glove never got wet, and there was no water on the floor. The stuff just turned into thin air when it got warm and vaporized. He said that was the reason why they had to study the stuff right there in Antarctica. You couldn't take sky ice back to America to study it because it was almost impossible to keep it cold enough during transit. It would always vaporize into air, and you'd have nothing left when you got back to the US. He said Russian scientists had discovered the same problem when they tried to take the sky ice back to Russia. So that was why they all had research stations in Antarctica. After maybe 15 minutes of handling the piece of sky ice, it was almost completely gone. Just a tiny bit was left. And my glove was dry the whole time. I'd never seen anything like it before or since. And that's unusual, because I've always had an interest in scientific things. I think that's even why I got selected to go to Antarctica, because a big part of the interview was about science and what I believed about things. So I really thought it was cool to see something I'd never heard of before. The whole time I was at McMurdo, I heard people talk about the wall, like that was a special place. It's pretty common to find ice walls and ice cliffs all over Antarctica. The whole place is ice. But it's all just normal white or clear ice. So I asked my friend where they get the sky ice from, and he said it comes from the wall. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but apparently there's a huge wall of sky ice in Antarctica. He said it was hundreds of miles inland from the coast. I never got to see it myself because I was only stationed to McMurdo. I didn't get to go out on expeditions. He said it was the biggest natural structure in the world. He said that in the 1960s, the US Army had a plan to bore a tunnel into the wall, but they didn't have a boring machine that could handle super cold temperatures. So they had a whole testing project in Greenland where they developed ice tunnels and invented new boring machines that could operate in super cold temperatures. Like, they did this whole big thing in Greenland just for practice. I'm not an expert on that, but that's just what he told me. Then, once they had the new boring machine figured out, they brought it to the wall in Antarctica. He said that the machine bored a tunnel, I don't remember exactly, like 5 or 10 miles into the wall, but that they never broke through the other side of the wall, and that they still don't know how thick the wall is even to this day. And I'm probably not remembering this part correctly, but I think he said that at first the floor of the tunnel was a solid rock, but after a mile or two in, the floor was sky ice. like it was sky ice underneath after a certain point, or something like that. And apparently, the wall slowly builds itself back up after you cut it, because after a year or so, the tunnel had shrunk smaller all by itself. They had to leave the boring machine inside the wall because the tunnel shrunk too small to get it back out. And after a few decades, the tunnel was completely gone. Like that part of the wall was solid again. He said that now the scientists were trying to use technology to figure out how thick the wall is. She said something about putting earthquake sensors all along the wall, and that somehow you could measure the signal from an earthquake to see how thick the wall is. But he kind of lost me on that part. I never really thought about any of that after I left. It was really weird stuff, but I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. But then a few weeks ago I saw a map of the wall in Antarctica. Except the map was all flat and crazy looking. And it showed the wall going all the way up to the whole Earth. So since then, I've been trying to learn more about the sky ice that I saw. And the wall that I heard about. But I can't find anything at all. So now I'm really wondering if there could be a connection here. So I hope that maybe some part of my experience will help someone figure something out.
The flat Earth map dates back over 1,000 years. This map is credited to being created by a Persian astronomer. His name was Al-Biruni and he lived between 973 AD to 1048 AD. It's the official map of the United Nations and also the United States Geological Survey. It used to be present in many places before the creation of NASA and the Antarctic Treaty in 1959. Here you see it with Admiral Byrd. This map has been restored by Dmitry from Russia with suggestions of mine, Eddie Alenkar. Known by my YouTube channel Flat Earth Banjo, I asked Dmitry to include the Bermuda Triangle and Point Nemo, a place deep in the Pacific where NASA buries rockets. Then Robert Tozzi, a professional mapmaker, came along and enhanced the map even more. There are many people now selling this map online, but if you could order it from my online store, I would greatly appreciate it. Visit my online store now and order one of the items. I humbly thank you.